Helen Keller is celebrated for overcoming the profound disabilities of being both deaf and blind. But few people know that in 1915, she penned her support for one of history's most disturbing medical practices. Her beliefs shocked the world and turned even her most staunch supporters against her. We'll get more into that story later on. Helen's first year and a half of life went by much like any other child. Born in Alabama in June of 1880, she possessed both sight and hearing at birth. But tragedy struck when she was only 19 months old, when she contracted an illness. Maybe her life might have been different if not for the fact that no one knew what illness Helen had. Doctors at the time described it as an acute congestion of the stomach and the brain. Modern doctors have a few theories about what could have ravaged Helen's system so completely. She most likely caught a nasty bacterium that her small body just barely fought off. The general belief is that she contracted meningitis. This disease is typically defined by fever, swelling, nausea, and neck stiffness. Swelling in the brain causes the symptoms of meningitis, which also accounts for the dire consequences the illness had on her senses. Although the baby girl recovered from her illness, she did not remain unscathed. From that point on, little Helen became deaf and blind. Whatever awareness the toddler had been gathering about the world ended suddenly, and it left Helen at sea in a dense fog, unable to communicate with those around her as she once had. Helen's early life was very isolated. Having now lost both her sense of sight and sound so early, she hadn't developed any significant speech skills either. It trapped her in her own little world, leaving most people on the outside. Only one person overcame the difficulty of understanding her. The daughter of the family cook, Martha Washington, could make out Helen's signs of communication in those early days following her illness. The young girl was only 2 years older than Helen, but she provided much needed support in what would have been a very scary time. By the age of 7, Helen had more than 60 home signs that she developed to be able to talk with her family. She also could distinguish people through the different vibrations their footsteps made. At this point, she was already showing signs that she was capable of much more. Kate Keller, Helen's mother, found inspiration for her daughter in the most unusual of places. Through reading American Notes by Charles Dickens, Kate learned of Laura Bridgman. Though she was 50 years older, Bridgman's story mirrored Helen's in many ways. She grew up in Hanover, New Hampshire. Always sickly, she lost her hearing and her sight at the age of 2, after the family dealt with a bout of scarlet fever that some members did not survive. Despite this, Bridgman managed to achieve communication and education with the world at large. Thanks to fewer means of sharing information in the 1800s, if it hadn't been for Charles Dickens, the Kellers may never have realized that their daughter had an opportunity for more. Thankfully, following this reading, Kate immediately jumped into action, urging her husband to start seeking help for Helen. Arthur Keller took his daughter to see a physician by the name of J. Julian Chisholm. Chisholm practiced in Baltimore, but he specialized in eye, ear, nose, and throat treatments, which made the trip to see him well worth the effort. Sadly, he could not offer the specific help that the Kellers were looking for, although there was a silver lining. The doctor had connections within the community that opened up a larger world to Helen and the Kellers. He introduced them to Alexander Graham Bell. Having founded his famed telephone company only the year before, Bell also had an interest in teaching. He had opened his school of vocal physiology and mechanics of speech over 10 years before Helen came to see him. This turned out to be a great decision for Helen. It's unclear how long she spent with Bell, but he did leave a big impact on her. The Kellers also got connected with the Perkins Institute for the Blind, the very school Laura Bridgman received her education at all the years earlier. At that time, the institute could be found in South Boston, but initially the school spared Helen the stress of a long journey. Instead, they sent someone to her. In response to the family's desperate request for help, the school asked a former pupil to get involved. Anne Sullivan had suffered from a condition that left her blind. She started her studies at Perkins the same year that Helen entered the world, and was a recent graduate by the time the Kellers reached out. So Anne found herself in a unique position to help. Little did she know at the time, she would change Helen Keller's life forever. Anne arrived at the Kellers' home in March of 1887, making Helen just 7 years old. The day that Anne arrived surely remained memorable to all members of the Keller family. Helen forever remembered that day as her soul's birthday. But her parents' relationship with Anne got off to a rockier start. If there had been any fear that Anne might become intimidated as a stranger in another person's home, it vanished shortly after their first meeting. Supposedly, she had no problem informing the Kellers that she disagreed with their values. She quickly got into an argument with Helen's parents over the Civil War and their history with slavery. It created a rocky situation that could have caused Helen's education to crumble before it even started. Thankfully, the Kellers were more interested in ensuring their daughter received an education than holding on to old grudges. Anne also took her job too seriously to risk it. She started teaching Helen immediately, using the gift that she'd brought her that day as a means to communicate, though it did not go easily at first. Anne taught Helen words by spelling them on her hand. She gifted the little girl with a doll upon first meeting her. Then Anne began spelling DOLL upon her hand. But Helen initially struggled to understand what Anne was trying to teach her. The initial strategy involved a strict schedule. Anne had a planned list of words that she would teach Helen, and she introduced new words constantly. But Helen really struggled with this method. Having been trapped in her own world for so long, she simply didn't understand that items even had words or names attached to them. That's how much she had to learn. Which is why she found it very difficult when Anne tried to teach her new words, not understanding what she meant. This led to some explosive reactions. While Anne started to open up the world for Helen, they faced their fair share of road bumps. In one particular instance, she tried to teach Helen the word mug, but Helen did not understand. Helen smashed the mug. She was probably extremely overwhelmed, and it was a natural response at the time. But after this incident, it became clear that they needed another approach, especially given the fact that Helen did not even understand the lessons. Anne decided to try spelling the words on Helen's hands, and in return, Helen was able to mimic her teacher, but she had no idea what she was doing or why any of it was significant. At this point, the whole thing must have felt impossible for both student and teacher. As Helen described it in those early days, She said, "I did not know that I was spelling a word, or even that words existed. I was simply making my fingers go in monkey like imitation." Anne's initial plan to teach Helen words on a strict schedule couldn't work if she did not even understand that she was communicating at all. This is why they needed to find another approach, and fast. The trouble came from the fact that Helen's condition left her isolated for so long. Anne tried to teach her to communicate, but having never communicated before, she did not understand the premise of spelling. Yet Anne could not explain the reason for her lessons until she learned the lesson. This paradox trapped them in a cycle that could have doomed the entire experiment. Now, it would have been very easy for Anne to simply give up on Helen when her initial strategy didn't work as she'd intended. But thankfully, Anne did not give up. Instead, she persisted, and eventually, Helen came to an important realization all on her own. Her realization held the key that unlocked the rest of the world for her. And it all came down to one simple word: in her lessons, Anne attempted to teach Helen the word for water by running cool water over one of her hands while she spelled the word on Helen's other hand. The tactile nature of this lesson suddenly made the lessons make sense to Helen in a way that they hadn't before. This moment really changed everything. After this, Anne had also come to her own realization that her student learned best when the lesson engaged her interest. So she switched strategies and started teaching Helen words that really interested her, rather than just going off a list. Within 6 months, Helen had transformed. Under Anne's guidance, the little girl learned very quickly. After they settled their initial setbacks, Helen began to rapidly understand the world around her. By the first 6 months, she learned 575 words, some multiplication tables, and the Braille system. Though Anne wanted more and she had no fear of pushing Helen's parents for it. So she encouraged the Kellers to send their daughter to the Perkins Institute, and eventually they agreed. In May of 1888, Helen moved to the Perkins Institute for the Blind with Anne accompanying her. From there, she started a journey that revolutionized not just her life, but the lives of so many others. Her incredible intelligence became clear once she could express herself and engage with others. She soared through school, graduating from the Perkins Institute to several other schools, both for the deaf and for the able-bodied students, before ultimately making history with her intelligence and determination to learn. Radcliffe College, a women's college associated with Harvard University, accepted Helen in 1900, though this proved to be a steep price for the young woman, who'd now spent years being educated away from home. Her educational journey faced early retirement unless she found a helping hand. Thankfully, Helen had made many friends and admirers by this point in her life. Mark Twain considered himself among those friends and admirers. Twain introduced Helen to Henry Hustleton Rogers, a wealthy oil businessman. Rogers had more than enough wealth to share and an interest in philanthropy, making him a perfect match for Helen. Rogers funded her journey through college, allowing her to focus on her studies without any other concerns. With the help of his money and Anne's support, Helen became the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree when she graduated from Radcliffe at the age of 24. Fully educated, the world now awaited her, and there was nothing stopping her. Helen became determined to communicate with the world. She learned to speak, allowing her to give speeches and lectures about her life. Through her lectures and her writing, she became an advocate for people with disabilities, as well as other issues that she considered important. But she never ceased being a woman, just like any other woman. And yes, that means that she had her very own love life. Helen met a man called Peter Fagan in June of 1916 at the age of 36. Fagan came to Helen when Anne became ill. He had been a reporter, and he took up the role of Helen's private secretary in the absence of Anne. Fagan shared her political views, and no one should be surprised when sparks started to fly between the two of them. Sadly, it seemed that everyone around Helen did not approve of the potential match. At the time, most people strongly discouraged the idea of disabled people marrying. In some areas, this idea persists today. It certainly persisted for Helen's family, who greatly disapproved of her relationship with Fagan, believing that someone needed to stop it, and soon. But Helen and Fagan made other plans. They were seriously committed to each other. Despite the opposition that they faced externally, the two of them became secretly engaged. They made plans to elope. Unfortunately, Helen's family intervened before they could complete their plans. According to one historian, her extended family vigorously squashed the relationship with forced midnight train trips out of town, an angry and gun-waving brother, and a drama worthy of a bad novel. Sadly, all of this became a pressure that Helen simply could not ignore. Dependent as she was on the support of those around her, she likely found it very difficult to disregard such passionate opposition to her desire. In the end, it seems like she gave in to the pressure and agreed never to speak to Fagan again after their broken engagement. But it also seems like deep down, she never truly forgot him. In her memoir, Helen wrote that she communicated with Fagan for several months, but in the end, her love dream was shattered. Though she did not allow any heartache to hold her back. What she lacked in romance, Helen more than made up for in commitment to her various causes. She continued to speak out at every opportunity that she got. In fact, she made a career off of her lectures and her writing, publishing 12 books as well as several articles, and constantly participating in various boards and committees throughout America that supported the rights of marginalized people. These included those with disabilities and the poor. But you might be surprised to learn that not all of Helen Keller's ideas illustrated progressive and inclusive thinking. One notably questionable belief that she held was eugenics, including the sterilization of those considered to be genetically inferior, and even the elimination of living disabled people. In 1915, Helen penned a letter regarding her beliefs in eugenics and wrote supporting the refusal of life-saving procedures to infants with mental impairments or physical deformities. Her reasons were shocking. She believed their lives were not worthwhile and they would likely become criminals. This belief goes against the image that most people have of Helen. It's no surprise that she faced great opposition early on in her life. Without the help and intervention of others, she likely would have lived a life very different from the one that she did. But with the right aid, she rose above the circumstances that fate gave her and became a power for true reform. While she did not always support the best ideas, she had a lasting impact on the rights and acknowledgements of those with disabilities. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, Hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.